visual radio. I don't know what number it is. It's like 249 or something. But we have a lot of fun. And William H. Briggs III, Billy Briggs.
Billy Briggs, William H.
The Remains. New Rose sent me a double LP yellow of the Remains from Europe.
Yeah, Vern helped put that out. Vern's a bass player, and Vern had a hand in that. And he basically called me up and said, "Is this all right with you?" And I said, "Send me money, and it'll be okay." And they did. So yeah, that was one of the more interesting projects that we've had over the years.
I'm going to talk about you, but I'm just going to, on a side, I was the first act signed to the guy who put that out back in '78.
Yeah.
So the French label. So Patrick's still doing like Last Call Records now.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so if you go to Last Call Records on the internet, maybe you'll find the Remains record from Paris.
I'm going to have to look that up myself.
Yeah, www.lastcallrecords.com. Patrick at Last Call Records. Hello, Patrick. Interesting man, put out a lot of different stuff, the Saints and the Trogs.
Yeah.
But the Remains, Vern Miller was in Swallow.
Yes.
With Phil Green on Warner Brothers.
Great band.
Who's the gentleman singing vocalist? Was he keyboard player?
George Lay.
Yes, George Lay and the Thrillers.
Yeah, well, George Lay he's famous.
He's legendary around here.
Yeah, he sure is.
Yeah.
Great guy, too.
Can we talk about Billy Briggs, the beginning? You know, what first turned you on to music or entertainment business?
Well, I always liked rock and roll. You know, and when I was a kid and rock and roll first started being heard, 45s, and I was pretty young at the time, but I hung out with the older guys because I was really into cars and hot rods, and of course you had to be 16 to have a driver. So those were my buddies, even though I was 9 or 10 years old. But rock and roll was making the scene, and Little Richard and all of the other famous acts that you could not count on either hand. There were hundreds of them. The Diamonds, I remember the Diamonds as being one of my favorite recording acts back then. And I would sit, they had every Saturday, I think it was Saturday morning or Sunday morning, maybe it was, but probably Saturday morning, because you didn't play rock and roll on Sundays back then. They'd have the top 20 on AM radio. And it started early. It started like at 7 o'clock in the morning, so it wouldn't upset too many people. And I remember I'd sneak that radio, that brown radio with the big Bakelite knobs on it, up into my room, and I'd have it there, and I'd get it out from underneath the bed, and I'd put my covers over my head, and I'd listen to the top 20. And I just, it was about the time I started reading books, too. It was the same kind of feeling that you would get, like, this is so wonderful, this rock and roll thing. So, and I've been playing piano since I can remember. My family had keyboard players in it, and there were keyboards around, so I got a chance to play.
Oh, who else played?
My Uncle Theos was a professional organ and piano player. My kinfolk are all from the Rhode Island area, kind of a country group. My uncle had the first Ford dealership in Rhode Island, so it goes back a ways.
Yeah.
And Model Ts piled up on the barn, and this was his son. He was my great uncle. And he had in his farmhouse, I guess it was, a little teeny room with 3 keyboards and a door. You walked in the door, there was a keyboard on each wall. And I remember going in there, there was a couple of organs and a piano, and I just was in 7th heaven going in there. And my mom played, and she always had a stand-up piano in the house. And so I remember from the time I was able to reach up and just barely see the keys playing. So when rock and roll started, the best way to hear it was to play it, was the way I always felt. And some of the bands that I really liked was all the instrumental acts. Johnny and the Hurricanes were one of my favorites, and there was a lot of keyboard action going on in those songs. And I also played in a bunch of these early teenage rock and roll bands that dressed the part. We had the gold lame jackets and that. So I remember playing in a band called Johnny and the Jays in the bad part of town, and playing in strip clubs when I was, 11 or 12 years old, and really interesting stuff. But playing pretty much every weekend, playing the high school dances, and I played with a guy named Mike Hayden, and Mike Hayden was a real mentor of mine. He was a guitar player And I didn't ever even think about playing in a band until in the junior high school, elementary school, what am I saying? Elementary school talent show when I was in the midst of elementary school. Mike came out with his guitar and his amp, first electric guitar I'd ever seen, and played Rumble. And it just knocked me out, you know. And Barry Tashin was around then too, this guy that I played with in Barry and the Remains, as it used to be known in this area. Better known as the Remains these days.
Around the world.
Yeah. And,
Well, the records were always the Remains.
Yeah, that was the way we decided to do it. But so I'd always played, and as soon as I could, Mike and I hooked up pretty early, and we always had you didn't have a lot of times you didn't have a drummer, and you never had a bass player back in those days. So it was usually Mike and I and some sort of horn player, sax player. We even had a clarinet player one time. But we'd do all those old rock and Stagger Lee, all those tunes.
Which ones would you sing?
I didn't sing at all.
Really?
Back then, no.
Even in the fun young bands?
Didn't sing at all. I was strictly a keyboard player and used to play regular piano because they didn't have electric pianos.
So you just roll in and they had the piano sitting there?
Whatever it was usually a disaster. But in a lot of the bands that I played in, I lived in a town called Westport, which is a pretty high zoot town in Connecticut. I think it was high zoot back then, but these days, close to New York City. My dad commuted after we moved from Rhode Island. And the next town over was Norwalk, and that was a little seedier, although it's pretty Tony today. Probably wasn't too bad a place back then either. But this is where all my Italian friends played. I mean, they all played, you know, guitars. A lot of them played sax, and there were some really good players in this town. So I just gravitated to those guys, and we hooked up, and that's when I got into all of these We had a band called the Rhythm Teens. There was Johnny and the Jays, and it was emulating the style of the times. It was usually a pretty big band. You know, you'd have 2 or 3 horn players. We even had a bass player. And usually you'd have like 3 guitar players, amazingly enough.
Wow.
Right, and we'd play at the Saturday night dances at the VFWs and the Italian Sons of Italy halls, and great times. And I don't know why my parents let me do it, but they did. So I was able to do all that. We played at the local junior high school dances with Mike Hayden's band. And see, Mike's family, his dad, Hiram Hayden, wrote a really incredibly well-known book. It was a history of Israel and the Jewish people. So he was a famous author, and basically they were beatniks. Back, that's what people were called who dressed that way and were literary folk or music folk back then, poetry type people. So, and his mom was a real beatnik. And they had the first stereo set that I ever saw, one big speaker, and the 45 changer. And they had all those 45s. I mean, and they were mostly the instrumental ones. Booker T and the MGs, that tune Last Night, I couldn't tell you who the musicians were on that. But and I still, these days, I've got all those on tape, of course, and so that's some of my favorite stuff to go back and listen to.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it is cool. I like it more now than I ever did.
Sure. I mean, you get the memories in, you're intimate with the music at this point. Right.
Well, there was a time there when that kind of music was actually scorned because it was, the new rock and roll. It was newer, the Stones, the Beatles, and it became a lot more sophisticated with the Beatles. And, that kind of got left in the dust, the old days. But now when you go back and listen to it, those are some really good players. And I have to give credence to Barry Tashin, because he and Rick Del Vecchio, who was a great sax player, and Barry had a band called the Schemers, really cool name. And he and I were always competitors. We always had different bands.
In Connecticut?
Yeah. And so it was a lot of fun. But Rick Del Vecchio, he had the best collection of 45 doo-wop bands, boxes full, but all properly cataloged, and he could play them for you. It was absolutely amazing stuff. So, but I must admit, I wasn't that into it in that period of time because we were all moving on, And so that's always played, always dug it.
What city were you born in, or town?
I was born in Battle Creek, Michigan, but I grew up in Rhode Island, in Warwick, near the airport there.
How old was your family? Were you in the family when they moved to from Battle Creek to
I
Rhode
was
Island?
6, and we
Okay.
moved from. Oh no, I'm sorry, from Battle Creek. No, I was born, almost born on a train. My dad was in the service.
Ah.
And I think he was to be stationed in Battle Creek, but they were on their way there, and I think it was a big rush to get to the hospital when I was born. So I wasn't in Battle Creek very long, probably 6 months.
Ah.
And then we moved to Rhode Island, back to where they were from. And then we moved to Connecticut when I was 6. My dad got a job in New York City. And we moved to Greens Farms, Connecticut, and then to Westport, right up the road, back in probably 1953.
So you were in Westport, Rhode Island? Or,
Westport, Connecticut, actually.
I'm sorry.
It can be confusing.
Yeah. And where in Rhode Island from Battle Creek? What was the city?
Warwick.
Warwick. Oh, that's
Yeah.
a big place.
Well, this was Governor Francis Farms was a fairly small area, and I'm not sure what that section of is actually called, but right down the street from the airport. Remember the airplanes flying overhead. So
Was there a significant band prior to the Remains, other than the bands you were playing and competing with Barry?
no, that was it. I mean,
Okay.
that was starting in junior high school. Is really when I started playing in, professionally, if you will,
Right.
with other guys.
And that band again was called?
Well, there was Johnny and the Jays.
Right.
There was the Rhythm Teens, and there was Mike Hayden's band.
Ah.
And Mike could really rock the guitar. He didn't need anybody backing him up. I mean, that's what people did back then. They were guitar and sing, and they didn't
Sure.
need anybody. So having a keyboard player, having a sax player, was a real thrill.
Now, did you meet Barry on the circuit, or did you meet him elsewhere too?
Barry, again, was, well,
was in the
through Mike Hayden, because Barry would invite, Mike Hayden would invite Barry to come over to his house and jam.
Ah.
And Barry had a little different style, so it was fun.
Yeah.
We'd get Barry and Mike playing, and the interesting thing was the guy who ran Barry's band wasn't Barry, it was a guy named Mike Friedman, and he had the Schemers, and the Schemers was a name that was handed down. They were really the big band, and we were the secondary band. But we didn't really play the same venues, but there weren't that many bands around then. There weren't that many musicians around. There weren't that many people around.
Huh.
I mean, compared to right now.
Sure.
So, everybody knew everybody who played. But when Barry would come over and jam, that's the first time I'd met him. And I said, man, this guy's got something. He's got it. So when Mike Friedman moved off and went off to college, probably, I remember him coming over to Mike Hayden's house one day and saying, all right, now I got this gig for you guys, but he said, you got to pretend that you're the Schemers. He said, you're going to be the Schemers on this. And this was this gig that, in one of the surrounding towns. And it was a big gig. It was a high school prom or something like that. And the theme was Harbor Lights. So we had to learn Harbor Lights. I remember that. And we were the Schemers that night. But that sort of thing was common, name swapping. So, and after that, Barry Tashin and I really didn't hook up until just before he went off to Boston University. We actually jammed a few times. I actually played one party with their band. His old girlfriend, Marge Golden, lived down the street from me. I used to hang out there, and they had a piano there, and I'd be there every day after school pounding that piano. And so Barry heard me play at Marge's house a lot. So he invited me to play a party, which I did at Andy Willauer's party. And it was a ton of fun. It was the Schemers plus me. So now they had keyboard, drums, still no bass, sax, Rick Del Vecchio, Barry T, and me. And it sounded hot.
What year about?
Oh, God, it must have been 63.
Okay.
And then Barry went off to college in 64. I was still finishing up high school, finished up Mike and I played a lot of gigs that year, Mike Hayden. And Barry called me and said, "You want to come up to Boston?" And he and I really hit it off. We were good buddies right from the beginning. And he said, "You want to come up and hang out in Boston and check out the scene and maybe play a couple gigs?" And I said, "Sure." So I rented a Wurlitzer electric piano from the place in New Haven where I used to run back and forth to get them. And drove up. We played at Nichols College, I think, and it really worked out well. And we did one other gig. So when I came up to BU the following year, it was a natural. We started the Remains, and we started rehearsing in the basement of Miles Standish Hall, which was the dorm in Kenmore Square.
Oh, yeah.
And Vern showed up from New Jersey, and it right from the beginning, the Rolling Stones had just come out. Barry had been in Europe for the summer, came back with all the Hot 45s. Said, "You got to listen to these guys." So it melded, that European sound, the blues sound, the old rock stuff that I'd been playing, and Barry had a very hard, attacking guitar, which very few people actually did back then. That's not really true. If you listen to some of those old records, you hear that, but you didn't notice it back then. So it clicked, and we started right off, and within 2 months, I think we were in the recording studio with Columbia.
Within 2 months?
I think it was within 2 months.
That was BU, Miles Standish Hall. That's where the little radio station, WTBU, I think was.
I'm not really sure if they even had a radio station back then.
Because now they've moved it, but it was there for years and years. The carrier current.
Could have been. Nice
environment for music.
Well, they had we got the guy across the Kenmore Square at the Rathskeller.
Jimmy Harold?
No, Gene.
Before Jimmy.
Oh yeah, this is the guy the owner, and there used to be a beer hall, and Barry and I and Vern and Chip had played there the year before as a trio upstairs, and so I think it was Barry who talked him into cleaning out the basement, and he said, we could pack this joint, so. So
it was Barry's idea for the Rat?
Yeah, and
wow.
They cleaned out the basement, and we started playing there on Monday nights. And I mean, it was a foul place.
Oh, sure.
And man, the line was around the block down the street. I think we played there every Monday night. And it
what
was
year?
60, would have been 65.
Wow.
Or was it 64?
The creation of the Rat.
Yeah, and it became, Monday nights. What a terrible thing when you're just starting college to go out and drink 50,000 beers on Monday night and get home at 2 o'clock in the morning and have to go to class the next day. But everybody went to the Rat, and they certainly didn't check anybody's ID as far as I remember. So all of our friends were able to come. And it was absolutely mesmerizing. We had all just gotten our big amps, and things were just starting to rock. And, Don Law came down and saw this thing going on. And it was just...
I saw Don at your reunion.
Yeah, at the Paradise.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he poked his head in there. I think he had 3 shows going the same night.
Yeah, but he spent a lot of time, because I was upstairs, I was right near him, and he stayed and watched your set.
Good.
I mean, he really, you never see that.
Yeah.
The guy, the guy's very busy.
Oh,
I think he's running all the Clear Channel for the country now.
I heard that. Yeah. Well, when the Rolling Stones were in town, we were thinking, well, it wasn't our idea. There's an off-Broadway play in the works, which you may or may not have heard about.
No.
That, and it may be premature to even bring it up, but we've got some guys in New York writing an off-Broadway play that they presented us with about a year ago, so they've been working really hard on it. And we've done a lot of interviews with them, and they're really serious. So the script is coming to a head, and it may be that Burying the Remains will be, or The Remains. They haven't decided about how they're going to present it. We have a new album that we did in Nashville about a year ago that's coming out this month, when we're going to play at the Paradise again on the 27th.
27th of September?
Correct. It's a Friday night. So, and we're going to debut our album, quote unquote. They're furiously printing them up in Nashville right now. They just, at the last second, just like everything else in the music business, it's always at the last minute.
I heard one of the songs on Barry and Holly's current album. They have one of the songs that's going to be on.
Which one is that?
Oh, About a Car.
Oh.
Is it About a Car?
Man's best friend is his automobile.
Is that on the album?
Yeah,
That's probably,
yeah,
there's a cut on Barry and Holly's album.
yeah. Right. It may be that one. Yeah.
Probably a little more countryish on his album than it'll be on the...
Yeah. Well, you know, the new album does have a flavor of country in it because you can't live in Nashville for 20 years and play with Emmylou Harris for 10 years on the road and not be
Right.
country. So
Which
there's
Barry
some,
did.
There's some country in there. It's just one more thing. We didn't take away, we didn't substitute the country thing for anything. We just added it. So it still remains, but there's some country-ish. There's some stuff that isn't country. And this, you know, the theory, I mean, the comments have been, you know, is this going to upset your fans? And hey, we're not a reunion band. We're not a oldies band. We're just a band, and we're playing today. I mean, we got back together again, and we're writing new music, and it's the music that we're feeling today, and we're doing it. And you know, the idea isn't to go back to the past. Now,
And for fans, it's you know, we're thankful that you're putting stuff out.
well, it came out great. I mean, we got a kick out. We did it in Nashville because Barry's down there. He knows all the people, and it was a lot of fun. And we didn't do a lot of rehearsing, but we did rehearse some down in Connecticut. And it worked, you know, just like the Remains have always worked. It worked. I mean, there's a magic thing with the Remains that hard to describe.
Now, 64, Barry came up to college at BU. So around 65, the Rat, you cleared out the Rat.
I think that was it might have been a year earlier, but I think that's the time frame. Yeah, because the Remains were only together for not even 2 years.
Yeah.
So it all happened. It was like a lifetime in 2 years.
So
a lot happened.
Columbia Records came into the scene.
Well, see, the thing is that Don Law's dad
Right.
worked for Columbia Records.
Don Law Sr. was the country producer.
Oh yeah, but he was.
Ray Price.
Yeah, but he just did it with Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
You know, all those guys, and he produced some, you know, some really early rock and roll records too. I mean, that, you know, you go listen back and you say, well, that's rock and roll, you know. So they were ready for something like that, and they had their label Epic, which was sort of their, you know, not their mainstream label, but not too far off the mainstream. So we wound up with a Robin McBride, who was a new producer for them, young guy, and we rehearsed. You know, we wrote some songs, wrote a bunch of songs, and we recorded that album. And we have demo tapes that are a lot of fun to listen to, and we played very fast back then. We learned to slow it down a little bit, not much.
Well, we do a little something called the demo that got the deal.
Yeah, I know. They're great. I've
Right.
listened
You've
to
seen
them.
the CD.
Yeah.
Okay, so the demo that got the deal for the Remains, was there a demo per se?
Yes. We actually went to New York in Studio A in Columbia and recorded it right there. That was the demo.
So not cut at the rehearsal space or
No,
at Miles
no, no.
Standish or at the Rat.
No, we went right down there and did it.
Cool.
I mean,
With the
well,
producer?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a one-take deal, you know, just run through the songs. But some of those songs keep winding up on some of these extended albums that, you know, come out, you know, much to our surprise.
Oh, so people have found the demos. And
Yeah, they keep putting them out. So, yeah. Sundays is our label these days, as far as our re-releases go,
Right.
and they've pretty much put out a, not a full-size album. Well, what's the next size down? It's not an EP.
okay,
It's the one between that. It's
Yeah.
not a full-size album, but
bonus
you know,
tracks.
Yeah, it's got a lot of the demo takes on it, and you know, it's fun to listen to those things, especially if you're a musicologist like a lot of you guys are. I mean, you go back and it amazes us when we play places that people know every note of every song and every nuance, and how did you do this, and how did you do that, and what did you use on this, and it takes, you know, you got to think back. I don't remember what I did on that, but
You know, there's the legend of the Remains is bigger than the records, because people said you people were a phenomenal live band and it never got captured by Columbia or Epic.
right. There was one record that did capture it though, and that was the demo that we made for Capitol. It was a little too bizarre for them at the time, but it was the absolute hardest rockin' set I think you're going to hear. Pretty raw, but it really captured the Remains in fine style. And it was a little too much. I mean, the only way we pulled it off was our one of our managers at the time, a fellow named Bob Bonus, who had run the Stones tour last time they had been in the country. Great guy to hook up with, and he understood exactly what we were trying to do. And he just, pushed the engineer out of the way, and he knew when all the guitar solos were coming up, and he just, everything was pegged. And, great equipment, so it didn't blow it off the tape like it might with a lesser studio. Excuse me. And it captured, basically when the Remains play, everything is up all the way to the point of where it just about feeds. Whenever we play a gig, we may as well tell the guys who are doing the sound, just turn everything up as loud as it'll go before it feeds back, monitors, everything, because that's what it takes for us to hear ourselves when we're playing it. And that's the way we played. We always played full tilt, real loud. I always called it marching band rock and roll because it was very precise changes and stops, but it all came about because of all the gigs we played. We played at every college within 50 miles of Boston. And we did it over. We never rehearsed. We just played, and we'd play all night. And Barry Tash and Barry T, as I like to call him, would pull the songs out of the hat. You never knew what he was going to call. And it was a lot of fun. And we can still do that today. We did that when we just played in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, a couple weeks ago. And it was a smaller venue put on by some people who are big fans of our band. But kids, these are late 20s. We have another whole group of people.
Oh, sure, I know of it.
That are.
It's pretty amazing.
It is.
You guys have inspired.
Right. So this garage rock genre that I never, we're surprised to find we were garage rock, but.
You and Multi from Provincetown area.
Yeah.
Multi and the Barbarians.
Right. So whatever garage rock is, I guess that's what we do. So these guys knew all of our stuff, and they're all good musicians too. We did a show with them in New York, and that's how they happened to hire us for this gig in North Carolina. But yeah, it's a real honor, and they know every note of every song. And we played in Spain about 5 years ago. That's how this whole thing got restarted.
Spain did it first?
Yeah. These guys called us from Spain and said, our life's ambition is to have Barry and the Remains play in Spain. And we said, Spain? We knew that some of our albums had sold over there, in Spain especially, but there's a whole, what would you call it, a movement that's a rebirth of the mod scene. Now, have you heard about that?
No, in Spain?
Yeah, but it's spreading. Now it's hit Seattle, and after about 5 years.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's motor scooters. Remember the Stones, the early pictures of the Stones with the sport coats,
sure,
with the turtlenecks and the skinny ties flying? That's the look. And the mop top haircuts, that's what it's all about. And these people, they just eat this stuff a lot. Probably the same way they like the blues players over there that nobody will go listen to here. But so this guy who had his own TV show over there for years and had his own band for years, had us come over and play, and we did this concert. And I don't know, 5,000 people, I think, came from all over the world, and it was just, from Hong Kong and Australia. And so it was a real honor.
Was it videotaped?
I don't know. There's a lot of pictures. Yes, it was videotaped.
Oh, that's very cool.
It was videotaped from the side of the stage, kind of.
At least it exists.
It does exist. It was our first time back together, and it isn't great, but it wasn't bad, and they loved it. And again, these people don't even speak English, and they know all the words to our songs, and they were singing along with the songs. So it was a real honor, and it inspired us.
Do you remember when the first Nuggets came out, the vinyl? Lenny Kaye's Nuggets?
Yeah, I remember it. I don't have a copy. You got a copy of that?
I do have a copy. Lenny Kaye signed it. Was it a thrill for you to be on that?
Didn't even think about it.
Wow, because it was such a groundbreaking record. And of course, there's the 4 CD set now.
Right. No, it never made an impression on me. And just lately, you're one of several people to bring that to my attention, and I have to admit that that's, I never thought about that.
It was a watershed moment, believe it or not.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, who would think a compilation of a bunch of 60s songs would become a very important, integral
Right.
musical movement? Because you mentioned garage rock. You know,
Yeah.
so much can be considered garage rock. Tommy James and the Shondells' first album is garage rock.
Yeah.
Then they went to sweet pop and all this. They kept changing, but that was a real garage rock classic. And Molty and Your Records, and there's a whole great sounding records that sound like you just had a rock and play.
Right.
I want to go back to the demos for a minute. You said there was a Capitol demo after the Epic stuff?
Well, that's how we got started on this. Sorry to digress.
Oh, that's all right.
What happened was we had been playing at On Dean's, which is a nightclub, really good place to play. Barbarians are playing there too.
In
New York.
Okay.
We had been playing at Trudy Heller's, but On Dean's, good gig, small club, one of those real Tony places, you know.
Uh-huh.
And it was a small place, and we just rocked that place out. I mean, just blew people away. And we had been playing there, and Bob Bonus had gotten this, he didn't think that Columbia Epic was doing us justice at the time, so he was really convinced that somebody else should pick us. We should try, get out of our contract. So he arranged this audition for 9 o'clock in the morning at the Capitol Studios. And when you played those gigs, you didn't get to bed before 5. So I don't even know if we went to sleep, but we went over there and we rolled this equipment in, and we were rolling. We were still on the high from playing from the night before and drinking coffee, and we were just wired. And they just turned on the tape and let it roll. And we just basically did our set from the gig from the night before, and we were right on. I mean, so that was that's what we call a Capitol demo. I don't know what anybody else calls it, but that's out on a session with the Remains. That's a record that's on Sundays right now. And if you want to hear an interesting, historical moment for the Remains, that was one of them, because that really captured the band. And that, Capitol didn't care for it. It wasn't polished. I mean, they were into the Beach Boys and that sort of thing. They weren't thinking along those lines, so they didn't pick it up. But at least we have it, And that, I know that if we hadn't done that, we would have been able to keep that little flame alive over 30 years. But anytime you want to hear I want to hear the Remains for what they were famous for, I go back and put that record on, and it's still, it's really hot. You know the one I'm talking about? Have you heard it?
No, I don't, actually.
God. It's called A Session with the Remains, and it's a live album made in the studio, but it's live. I mean, it's basically one take. I think I stopped a few, but it's got those, talking between and all that stuff.
So was this after the Beatles tour?
No.
Before?
There's nothing after the Beatles tour.
Okay, so the Beatles tour was it?
That was it.
How do you top that?
Right. Well, that was the problem. That was the psychological problem. The drummer was different, and how do you top that? And we were young and pretty crazy. I was 19 years old.
You were 19 when you opened for the Beatles?
Yeah.
Wow, it must have been such
Maybe
a trip.
I was 20, I don't know. I'd have to go back and I'd have to
Such
look
a
at a calendar. Right. I'm 56 now. That was a long time ago.
You're a youngster.
I'm a kid.
You're still rocking.
Still rocking. I don't feel any different than I did back then. I don't know if that's good or bad. My wife rolls her eyes when I say that.
How many kids you got?
2, Jake and Jennifer. Jennifer's working in New York. She's the, what is her title? She works for AOL Time Warner. She's the artistic director for Parenting Magazine Group, and she's...
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, she's an artist, and she went to Syracuse University and got a degree, and proved to everybody that you can be an artist. You're not a rock and roll artist, but you can be an artist and actually make a living. So she does very well, and she was pretty close to the September 11th thing, so we've been in touch with her a lot over the last couple of days, of course. And my son is 24, 25. 7/11/77 is his birthday, so I'd have to count back on my fingers. But you can't forget his birthday. Those are the lucky numbers, right? 7/11/77.
Sure.
And he's a great guitar player and a singer, and big tall guy. and he's still rocking. I mean, I guess, how could it help but not rub off?
Sure.
That's what I like to think. So I teach him I play in a blues band too. I play lead guitar in a blues band and keyboard. I've been doing that for 25 years too. So that's my other band that I play in. A band called Little Malcolm and the Malfunctions.
And where do they play?
We play around the North Shore a lot. We do a lot of private stuff.
Riviera, Lynn?
No, actually more like, I live up in West Newbury now, and I used to live down in Chelmsford, and I moved up there because that's where all our gigs were. So we play Southern New Hampshire, Newburyport, and all the surrounding areas, Essex, on the water, all those clubs. And it's a good venue.
How long have you had the band?
25 years.
Wow.
And they're all the same guys too.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's a good band. It's a really good band. And the blues is something that a lot of people, the interest in the blues waxes and wanes. But, in the last, Stevie Ray Vaughan didn't hurt. But, there's been a lot more interest in the blues in the last 10 years or so. And that's, we're working. We got plenty of gigs.
Do you record it all?
We haven't recorded. Interestingly enough, we've never really put together a good setup for recording. I have a recording studio in my house, so we have recorded there. But we're still...
Oh, so you have some tapes?
Yeah, but this is a band that we're not interested in going on the road. We're not interested in making hit records. It's a bunch of musicians, and we just play the hell out of it every time we play. We play, 3 and 4 sets, and we play a lot of music. We have a set list that just goes on and on. And it's just a lot of fun to do, and it's a totally different thing than the rock and roll band.
Malcolm?
So Little Malcolm.
Little Malcolm.
Yeah, he's the lead singer.
Okay.
I sing about a third of the songs too. Little Malcolm and the Mal-Funk-Shuns.
Little Malcolm and the Malfunctions.
Yeah, and it sounds a little silly, which it is. But there's a certain humorous element to this band that's kept us together for 25 years. We get along really well, and we always have a lot of fun. There's a lot of joking around.
Any famous guest stars ever just drop in and jam?
Not really. Not really. We don't play in Boston because there's a lot of exploitation in Boston, so we don't do Boston shows.
Not even the House of Blues?
No, especially the House of Blues. I won't say any more about that.
Okay.
But, it's a sore point. But no, there's plenty of work up where we are. It's local work. It pays really well, and it's a little older crowd, frankly. Kids still aren't into that blues that much. We find the 20-year-olds.
Well, they seem to love Buddy Guy.
Yeah, but Buddy Guy doesn't play what he used to play. We play the kind of stuff that Buddy Guy used to play. Okay. And Muddy Waters and all those guys. So we're basically a Chicago blues band. Ah. And that's the kind of sound that we have. We have a harp player, and Buddy's a showman. I mean, he's a great guitar player. He's got
the great show now, the Hendrix tunes and.
Sure, and he plays the Hat Show.
Cream tunes.
He plays the Harbor Lights.
Just opened for the Stones. On Sunday?
Right. But nobody even mentioned that to me. All the people that told me about the Stones never said one word about Buddy Guy opened the show.
Well, I was thinking of going, and it's like Buddy would have been the reason,
Right. So there it is. Here's this guy who's a great musician that nobody even mentioned to me that he was opening the show. And I was down in, I've been traveling around, and I work 17 hours a day at my car dealership that I've been working at for 25 years. So I'm a little insulated, but you can only cram so much in there these days.
I had a commercial like 2 nights ago for the car company, and I was going, I better call Billy, and then you called me, so it was funny. But I listen to 99.1 a lot.
Oh yeah, me too.
You guys advertise on that?
Yeah.
But a lot of fun stuff we covered today here. The Remains. Just 2 years, you made such an impact because there was the Bosstown sound, of course, but you transcended that.
Well, that came after us. We had already moved to New York, believe it or not.
Oh, you'd moved to New York?
Permanently.
Ah.
Because everybody said, if you want to make it, you got to go to New York. So we did.
I never realized that because we always consider you the Boston's.
Well, I mean,
Remains.
this all happened in a short period of time.
Yeah.
When we moved to New York, it was just a matter of months before we were out playing the Beatles tour, and then that was that. And we were out in California, and we stayed out in California, Barry and I. And
So Don Law Jr., it must be Don Law Jr. if Don Law
I
Sr.
guess so.
Yeah.
mean-
Don called his dad, or?
I guess, yeah. And they sent, well, they didn't come down to see us. I think we went basically to them. I remember Don giving me a ride down in his Mercedes
Really?
to New York, and you know, the Remains have always done this thing where we meet up. You know, we get to the gig, we're all here. We are. You know, hey, you made it, and everybody always made it too.
Those were the days of the Tea Party?
Yeah, but we didn't play at the Tea Party. The Tea
Don was
Party
running it, though.
after us.
Yeah.
The Tea Party hadn't even opened yet.
Oh,
by
wow.
the
So it was
time we
pre-Tea
left.
Party.
Yeah,
So Don was just a student with Barry?
yeah, at BU.
He was booking his concerts at BU, I think.
Not yet.
Whoa.
No.
That's early days.
It is early days, yeah.
Wow.
I mean, the first concert we played was at BU. We played with Junior Walker and the All-Stars, and it was a great show. We opened for them, and we were watching him play. We were really
Sure.
knocked out.
What does it take?
But that was the first time we did, you know, our hard rock jumping up and down on stage. We've been playing at the Rathskeller, and, you know, it worked. Everybody flipped out. And it was a big audience, too. So that was actually probably the first big audience we played in front of. Sure swelled my head up big.
It's like the first Boston gig is like with Junior Walker, and then you've got the Beatles tour. In between, any other acts come through that you opened with or performed
Well,
on
we
stage
did a
with?
lot of these college. I mean, we played at every college within, you know, driving distance of Boston, and that was our, you know, our booking agent. That's what they did. So we played with all of the ladies bands, the Crystals, and you name
Oh,
it.
yeah.
When they all came through town, we didn't back them up, but we were the other act, and sometimes we were fortunate enough to even be the stars of the show, and they'd be before us. But so we did some of that stuff.
Shangri-Las, maybe?
You know, I don't think so, because I remember the Shangri-Las, and I don't think we did. But there was a certain group of bands that played the college circuit, and whenever they came through town, you know, we kind of got attached to the show, so it worked out pretty well. Of course, we did a lot of frat parties, and we wound up, you know, we went as far as Syracuse, New York, and Pennsylvania, and those are interesting gigs, you know.
Now, the G Clefs were playing the Revere Beach scene a lot. Did you ever, you paths ever cross?
We did. One time we played a gig, and they played and we played, and that's all I could tell you.
Wow.
But we played at the Surf Nantasket once or twice, and that was a real kick. You know, that's when the Rock and Ramrods were around.
Sure.
And the Kingsmen used to play there too. And the Kingsmen were one of those bands that did the circuit. And that's how I actually wound up playing with the Kingsmen for a short period of time.
Did you?
Yeah, I went on tour with them in the Southwest.
In what year, about 60?
That would have been in '65, because we had to take a summer. We actually took a summer off because our drummer Chip Damiani had a chronic problem with an ulcer, so he had to take. And I think he had mono too, so he was pretty sick for a summer. So while he was taking time off, I went on the road with the Kingsmen, and that was a ton of fun.
Very cool.
Traveling in a bus all through the United States, playing in all these southern towns, and it was wild.
Now, was it Eastman in the band?
Yeah.
Len Eastman?
Yep.
And, Jack Eli wasn't in it anymore.
Who was the original guys?
Don Gallucci, maybe?
I couldn't tell you the names
Yeah.
of the guys. It was the original drummer, it was the original guitar player, it was the sax player, and me.
And they were on Sundays, of course.
Well, now they are.
Yeah. They were on ones back then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, doing Louie Louie every night. It was tons of fun.
Pretty amazing.
Well, it was, you know, they had me pretend, they didn't want to upset their fans, so they pretended that I was from England. So I had long hair, of course. So I had this hat that I used to wear, you know, like a Beatle hat. And I had this phony English accent that I'd put on. I got pretty good at it too. So for the whole tour, I was from England. And the only bad time was when I met up with this guy from England. And he started asking me, you know, where did you live? And, you know, but, you know, I said, yeah, you know, I'm from Surrey. You know, down the street you go over the arches, and I'm off to the right there. And you go, oh yeah, I know where that is. So I even blew by that one somehow. But we just did some crazy things back then. Of course, we did.
Remains ever play outside of the country?
No,
Outside of the Spain gig?
No.
Wow.
That was it. And we'd like to do some more of it. Barry
Sure.
Tashin and his wife Holly have toured pretty extensively in Europe, and he was over there with Emmylou Harris, of course. He played with Emmylou for 10 years on the road. So Barry's gotten his licks in over the years. So yeah, it's a wonderful place, and we'd like to go back, and we're trying to put it together. One of the things that we do these days, because we're not doing it, I mean, we're doing it for the money because we want to get paid, what we deserve to get paid, but we don't have to play there. So we don't play until the money's in the bank. We don't leave town until the money's in the bank. And it's pretty tough to get some of these fly-by-night promoters in Barcelona to put up the money before we leave town. But that's what it requires for us to play these days.
You have to.
We really do. I mean, the days of, it used to be, the guy would come in with a briefcase in the back room with a gun, and you'd have a paper bag and the money thrown in there. And that was more with the King's Men. But Chuck Berry,
Really?
Chuck Berry used to bring a paper bag full of money on stage with him. He'd get paid before he went on, and he'd bring the money on stage with him because he's afraid somebody's going to rob him.
Well, yeah, it's a crazy business. It would seem that Remains could get sponsorship these days, and just someone would want to get behind some kind of a British tour or European tour.
We have, one of the problems that you have we're doing this all by ourselves. We produce the record ourselves. Our record company is called Rocks a Lot. We're releasing the album ourselves. And the music business is in dire straits these days. The record companies are hurting. They're all losing money hand over fist. The people who have left the record companies and started their own record companies are, really having trouble holding on. And it's not the best scenario for a band like us to sign with a label again. So we decided that we're going to keep it a little bit smaller time. Basically, because we all work other jobs, we have enough money to pay for the whole thing ourselves, and that's what we've been doing. But unfortunately, we really can't afford to do it on a global scale. But we'll see. With the internet, which has helped us really bring this band back in the last 5 years, I think we'll do all right with the record. And if somebody wants to pick it up, great. But did I mention to you that there's a off-Broadway play in the works about
Yes.
Barry and the Remains? Yeah.
That's exciting.
It is, and whether it actually happens or not, those are some guys that they're pretty high-powered people that are putting it out. They're doing this, and they're smart people, and they have a hard time understanding why there aren't people rushing up with suitcases full of money to back us. But that's not the way it works. Everybody's got their own thing, and it isn't likely that somebody's going to be knocking on our door. Believe it or not, even if people know us and like us, it's still up to us to, if we're going to do this thing, we'll have to do it ourselves. So at least initially. So we're printing up the records, playing at the Paradise on the 27th of September this month. That's our official release date for our record.
And what day is it? Is it Saturday?
It's a Friday night.
Friday night, the
actually.
27th of September at the Paradise Theater,
right.
967 Com Ave. You just did Chapel Hill,
Yeah,
North Carolina.
North Carolina.
And other gigs in the offing?
Yeah, well, in the offing, not that are firm. I mean,
So Paradise is the record release party.
It is, yeah. We've had some offers, but it's the same situation. We got to
Sure.
have the before we can leave. It costs me a lot of money to take a week off from work.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It's got to be at least. I got to at least break even, folks. So yeah, the remains are available for bookings. And Barry Tashin, you can find him on the web, of course. Like you can find everything else on the web. Barry Tashin handles the bookings, and he's out of Nashville. And you go on Google and put the Remains in there, you can find 50,000 different sites on the Remains. So
He's Tashin.com. Is there a Remains.com?
no, but there's a link.
So Tashin.com.
There's Tashin.com. There's Tashin Music. There's Barry Tashin. I mean, any way you put it in. Tashin. If you put that in there, you're going to wind up with the Remains sooner or later.
Wow. Our guest is William H. Briggs, keyboard player for the legendary Remains and Visual Radio. It's so much fun having you here today. talking about
You
your-
know, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, and maybe we'll do it again sometime.
That'd be great.
Okay?
I gotta get an autograph from you.
Okay. My pleasure.
Thanks, Billy.
Okay.
And we'll see all you real soon, of course.
Thank you. Good. So what is that, half hour?
No, we just did an hour.
Really? How much did we do before?
30.
Okay,
My show's an hour, his is 30 minutes. You did 90 minutes today.
good.
Very good interview, Bill. Wow, great stuff.
Oh, there's a lot of, I could write a book.
You should.
It'd take me forever.
Welcome to On Topic. Our guest today, our very special guest, is Bill Briggs. Bill Briggs, a former member and current member of one of Boston's top bands in history, The Remains.
Thank you.
Welcome to On Topic, Bill.
Thanks for having me.
Nice to have you here. Remains, of course, a part of the lore of Boston rock and roll, dating back well into the mid-1960s. And one of the things the Remains are nationally famous for, internationally rarely, is for being with the Beatles on the Beatles' final tour.
Yeah, that was one of our claims to fame, that's for sure. When somebody says, now, who are you guys? I say, well, yeah, we're the other band. We opened for the Beatles on the Beatles tour, and that always strikes a spark. Even if they don't recognize our name, they remember that 66 Beatles tour. So that was a big deal for us.
Yeah, that was 1966, and you guys were sort of an up-and-coming band at the time. You hadn't really had a national hit, but you were well-known in New England anyway. I don't know about other parts of the country.
Well, I think we had minimal followings in Chicago and maybe San Francisco and a few other sparsely populated areas that I couldn't tell you exactly where, but we sold a few records, you know.
Yeah.
We sold a few records.
Well, when you toured with the Beatles, you actually were on stage longer than anybody else for those shows.
Yeah, that was real work. You know, we had actually been used to playing 2 and 3 and 4 sets and even more, so we were inured to that hard knock life. And yeah, we opened by doing our own set, and then we backed up Bobby HEBB, as I recall. The order might escape me, but and then the Circle came on, really good band, the Circle.
People might remember Red Rubber Ball.
Yeah, great song, great band. I mean, those guys were young, so were we. They were still in college, as I remember, when they were doing that. And but we were impressed by their musicianship, and they were pretty cool, you know, pretty cool guys.
Yeah.
And then we went off. We went off when the Circle came on, and they did their set. And then we went back on and backed up the Ronettes, which was a real challenge, because Ronnie wasn't doing the tour. So they didn't really have a lead singer. I'm not sure which of the girls actually wound up singing most of the songs, but you know, they expected to have it right there, and it was you know, not maybe what they were used to, having a rock and roll band back them up.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, it was a real challenge. Barry was really up for that, though. He knew all the songs, and he was able to do it. So if we foundered, he was right there. And I mean, we rehearsed. We really did. But how much could you rehearse without the Ronettes?
Yeah.
So I think we might have gotten in one rehearsal with the Ronettes before we actually played. So we were expected to know the stuff without actually running through it. And it was a real challenge. The chords weren't as tough on that one as Bobby HEBB, though. Bobby HEBB was Sonny. Has a lot of chords.
Yeah.
And,
it keeps
you know,
changing
E
keys, right?
flat, and, you know, you're trying to, rock and roll keyboard players don't play in E flat much.
That's a fact.
So it took me about half the tour to get that tune down. But I eventually got it. Very minimal, very tasteful, very minimal piano on that when I was playing it. But like I said, Barry had he had it down. So he was always able to make it work.
Now you were, of course, the keyboard player. Were you playing piano, organ, or both on that tour?
No, actually what I played was a Hohner Pianette N, which is an electric piano, considered an electric piano. And that was always what I played.
Oh.
And I used to play a Wurlitzer before that, but the Wurlitzers were extremely temperamental, to be polite. They had the good sound, you know, that Ray Charles, What I Say beginning, that's a Wurlitzer piano. So that was what I started on. And, you know, the electric piano always freed up guys like me to play more gigs, because you'd show up on a gig and the piano would be junk, or it would be 2 steps flat, and it was always a horror show. So when they had these Wurlitzer electric pianos, you can go out and rent them, and, you know, of course I was right there renting them. And I bought one, and then I bought another one, and I had it. But when we started playing a lot, it was a constant. We were at the music store every Saturday morning fixing the thing. So when Hohner came out with this electronic piano that had less moving parts, to simplify things, it worked well. And I had Terry Hanley from Hanley Sound help me soup it up, so it put out a good, had a good output. And I ran it through, you know, back then we were one of the bands that started with big amps. I mean, you didn't see bands with big amps, but I got the first Vox Beatle that Wurlitzers got in for the keyboard, and I think Barry and Vern both had the first Sun amps. They were custom made by Norm Sunholm, who was I guess he was the brother of one of the guys in the Kingsmen. So there was a connection there. I had toured with the Kingsmen briefly when their keyboard player had to go for his Army Reserve training. So that's a whole other story, by the way. But so that worked out well. And when we did the Beatles tour, I went down to Hohner. They were out in Hicksville, Long Island at the time, and I was able to go out there and talk them into giving us lots of stuff, promising them that their name would be prominently displayed. So I got another keyboard, because still in those days, the way I played real hard, I'd break it. So we used to have one in the shop out in Hicksville, Long Island, and one on the road. And I was constantly, it was about 2 hours out on Long Island, and I was constantly driving out to Long Island and dropping one off. And they couldn't understand, what could this guy be doing to this thing, to be destroying it so quick. You know, I'd have the thing for 2 weeks and it'd come back in pieces. And they'd say, well, here's another one, ready to go. And I did play harmonica, still do. So I got them to give me a bunch of harps. I used to use, and people cringe at this, including me today, because I still play harp, but harps are pretty expensive. Hohner Marine Band harmonicas are pretty expensive. And in those days, I'd use them once and throw them away. So pretty decadent.
I guess.
And I used to get boxfuls. I mean, you know, boxfuls of harps.
Yeah.
So, there were harmonicas everywhere. In the truck, under the gas pedal, you'd go to put the clutch in, there would be a harmonica under there. So we got them to give us drums. We didn't actually use them, but we had them for rehearsals. And we had, I think we got a bass guitar. We got everything we could get our hands on. So they sponsored me, so I had 2 of those. And that's what I played on the Beatles tour. I played that exclusively, and that never really used the organ unless I was in the studio. And I still don't use organ too much, but more these days, because we're playing more of our stuff from our old albums that we never actually used to do on stage. And more of our new stuff has some organ in it, so I've had to get my organ sound going these days.
Now, how did you, like when you were backing, let's say, Bobby HEBB doing Sunny, the record arrangement has got horns in, vibes and different things. Now, what would you do as a keyboardist?
Not much. You know, basically sustained chords.
Yep.
And it was minimal backup. But the thing about Bobby is that he was a really good entertainer. So, I don't think he even needed a band. He could have gone out there by himself with a guitar and probably done just fine. And you get the impression that over the years that's exactly what he had had to do on a lot of occasions. So, as I say, being a pretty minimalist keyboard player in those days especially, 30 years later I've obviously branched out a little bit. But in those days,